You must have been a wonderful child. When you were only starting to go to kindergarten, I bet you drove the little boys wild.
My mother, Lucy Manning Barry, known to everyone as Grand-Mère, was born in 1906 in Paris, France, where her father, Archibald M. Brown, was studying architecture at the École des Beaux-Arts. She spoke French fluently and always welcomed an opportunity to do so. The family, which at this time included her older sister Helen, returned to the United States in 1910 when Archibald Brown became a partner in the firm of Peabody, Wilson and Brown, considered to be one of the leading architectural firms in New York, known primarily for their design of large country residences. Winters were spent in New York City and summers in an old farmhouse dating back to 1689 in Stony Brook, a village on the north shore of Long Island. The house was revised and extensively enlarged to accommodate the growing family, and in 1993 it was listed on the National Register of Historic Properties. Grand-Mère spent some of the happiest years of her life at East Farm, as the place in Stony Brook was called. She loved being in the barns with the animals, to the horror of her French governesses, and riding her horse Liberty. She would recount her memories of her years in Stony Brook all her life. Grand-Mère attended the Chapin School in New York. In her class there were two well-known graduates, Anne Morrow, who was to marry Charles Lindbergh and become a noted author, and Anna Roosevelt, the daughter of President Franklin Delano Roosevelt. She then spent 1 year at Bryn Mawr College, which she left to indulge her interest in painting. She and her mother took drawing classes at the Art Students League in the 1920s. Grand-Mère was an avid golfer in her later years. Her father was on the American golf team, and her grandmother, Lucy B. Brown, was one of the first women golfers in the U.S. Grand-Mère was fun-loving and extremely outgoing. She made friends easily and was noted for her humor and enthusiasm. She loved to travel and was especially fond of boat trips. These included tramp steamers, transatlantic crossings, cruises to Bermuda and the Caribbean. One noteworthy trip was to Godfrey Baker's wedding in Barbados. He and his bride had come across the Atlantic from Europe in Frank's yacht Commotion. Needless to say, Grand-Mère enjoyed a sunny afternoon of sailing on Commotion. My father, Herbert Barry, Jr., the oldest son of Herbert Barry and Sarah Morgan Dawson, was born in New York City in 1898. My paternal grandfather grew up in Warrenton, Virginia, and received his law degree from the University of Virginia, after which he moved to New York City, where he eventually became a senior partner in the law firm of Barry, Wainwright, Thatcher, and Simmers. A veteran of Squadron A, he went overseas in 1918. After the war, he was commissioned a major in the 61st Cavalry Division. He later became a lieutenant colonel in the Officers Reserve Corps. He retired in 1931 as a full colonel. Not surprisingly, he was an avid polo player. When my father was 7 years old, his parents bought a large Victorian house in Llewellyn Park, West Orange, New Jersey, which they called Barrymead. The house was built about 1860 on the slope of a hill. In his early years there, my father remembered seeing the New York skyline from the veranda. A daughter, Eleanor, was born in 1906, and later a son, christened Stuyvesant, but known all his life as Peter. It was here that my brother, sister, and I spent our summers in the 1930s. My parents married in 1929 and settled in Cambridge, Mass. My father was at that time a professor of psychology at Tufts University. After a few years, they bought a Georgian-style house located at 14 Kirkland Place. We children went to Shady Hill School, an early proponent of progressive education. However, when my father decided to get his medical degree, in order to become a psychiatrist. We were taken out of private school and sent to public school. After 3 years, my brother Herb entered St. Paul's School in Concord, New Hampshire. He graduated summa cum laude in 1948. My sister Lucy and I went on to Windsor, a top-drawer girls' preparatory school in Boston. In 1947, my parents decided to move to Brookline, feeling that Cambridge was becoming too much of a city. My parents divorced in 1959. Being the wife of a physician was a great adjustment for my mother. She was used to being married to a professor who had the summer off, during which they would travel to Europe, while we children were sent to Barrymead. The years when he was an intern and a resident, my father was frequently away from home. Incidentally, he was on duty during the famous Coconut Grove fire, when hundreds of badly burned people were rushed to the Boston City Hospital. After the divorce, my mother stayed at 5 Perrin Road, where it soon became a temporary home to a succession of nieces, nephews, friends of her grandchildren who were enrolled in one of the many colleges in the area. Also, my son John, who lived there for 2 years while working for a company that periodically sent him overseas to do cost of living research. In thanks for taking my cousin Jimmy Brown, my uncle Archie turned over his camp on Lake Champlain in Shelburne, Vermont, to Frank and me for 6 weeks in the summer of 1966. Following the divorce, my father married his secretary, Joan Bolton, who was 26 years younger. In the winter, they lived in an apartment near the Massachusetts General Hospital, where he was on the staff of the psychiatric department. They spent summers on Ames Hill, a summer community in Marlborough, Vermont, where my parents had bought the house in 1945. It was situated on the crest of the hill with a magnificent view looking east towards Mount Monadnock in New Hampshire. It had at one time been a tavern, later a sheep farm. There were several large outbuildings on the property where square dances were held, as well as meetings of the Ames Hill Association. My brother, Herbert Barry III, graduated from Harvard in 1951 and then went to Yale for his Ph.D. He subsequently moved to Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, where he became a professor at the School of Pharmacy in the University of Pittsburgh. He has many interests, ranging from anthropology to birth order, and has published a number of scholarly articles and books, including several in conjunction with his father, on the impact of early maternal bereavement on mental disorders. Herb was particularly interested in the attributes of alcohol. In 1970, he published a 2-volume treatise in conjunction with a Finn from the University of Helsinki called Actions of Alcohol. My sister Lucy graduated from Radcliffe in 1952, where she was primarily interested in the theater, working with the Hasty Pudding Club and organizing a children's theater. She decided to move to New York to further her theatrical interests, where she became secretary to several Broadway songwriters, producers, notably Frank Lesser, who was writing and producing How to Succeed in Business, and songwriters Betty Comden and Adolph Green, who were producing a new show focusing on their own work.
Two sleepy people by dawn's early light, and too much in love to say goodnight.
In 1971, she married Robert Robe. Their daughter Parrish was born in 1973. Lucy died in 1996. After my divorce in 1975, I started accompanying my mother on annual trips, scheduled for January or February, in order to get away from the New England winter. Our first trip was a Nile River cruise, followed by 3 years cruising the Greek islands, and then 2 years on the Yangtze River through the fabulous 3 gorges, which are soon to be inundated by the High Dam. These trips were followed by tours of Yemen, Madagascar, and African safaris, combined with visiting an old friend of my mother's who had become British ambassador to Gabon on the west coast of Africa. Our last 2 trips were to the Galapagos Islands. Amazingly, my 85-year-old mother was still able to clamber into the rubber zodiacs. Lucy Manning Brown Barry died in Brookline at the age of 94.
This will be my shining hour.